I'm Joe Germann. I'm the owner and restorer of the Wild Child. The Wild Child is a factory experimental race car. In 1965, John Phillips of Ford of Canada, he was the performance director, initiated a program where they were going to build several B factory experimental drag cars to race in and around Canada, Michigan, New York area, and go out and conquer some drag racing titles. So in 1965 they built 3 BFX Falcons. All right, each of these Falcons had the 289, 271 horse K-code Mustang engine that was used in the United States. In addition to that, in these 3 BFX Falcons, they had a NASCAR-style 4-speed top loader, a 9-inch Detroit locker with 456 rear gears, and they had a complement of drag racing factory experimental parts, including the fiberglass fenders, hood, front bumper, doors, and trunk lid that are on this car today. So that car was sold to Rankin Ford, which was one of the elite racing shops in Canada. And Rankin Ford got John McIntyre as the crew chief and Ev Rouse as the driver, and teamed them up to campaign the car throughout Canada for that year. So when they got the car, they took the motor apart and sent the motor down to Detroit, and it was rebuilt with steel pistons, I think it was crane cams, the Cobra heads, and the Weber Ford double carburetor induction system, all parts that were part of the BFX package that John Phillips put together out of Ford. So there were these 3 cars that were raced in 1965 as 289, 271 horse BFX cars. In the winter of 65 to 66, Rankin Ford invested, and Ford of Canada invested in stepping up the game. At that time, the funny cars were just starting to come about in the United States. All right, so the Wild Child was stripped down. They altered the wheelbase. They pushed the wheels forward 6 inches. They put a straight axle 1939 Ford in the front end, 12 inches forward, and put a 427 wedge motor, and they ran nitromethane in 1965. They were the fastest funny car up in Canada in 1965. One of the problems they had was they kept blowing up for the 427 wedge engines. Part of that was due to the fact that Ev Rouse didn't know whether to shift before or after the engine blew up. All right, so in 1966 to 67, they acquired the Holman Moody 427 sock engine with dual 4-barrel carburetors, 657 horsepower. All right, they took that engine, tore that one down again, machined the crankshaft to incorporate the wider journaled Chrysler Hemi type rods on it. Mickey Thompson aluminum pistons were in it, crane cams. And in 1967, they ran the full season as a full-blown AFX car. They moved the front wheels back 6 inches and campaigned the car as that AFX configuration. At the end of 67, they sold the car, and it was raced by a local racer in the area, and it passed through a whole bunch of hands. And I acquired the car in 2003. It was complete. However, it was worn out, it was beat up. The boys at the Ford dealership would take it and play in the backyard and, you know, just play Ricky Racer with the car. So I did a little search, got hold of John McIntyre and Ev Rouse, and I called John McIntyre and I said, hey, did you guys own this car? Well, what happened then is we developed a really awesome friendship, and they helped guide me through the complete restoration of this car. And they started sending down photographs, newspaper articles. People in Canada started to get real interested in this car. I was getting all kinds of information from all over the place. And I now have volumes of information on this car, of old drag racing memorabilia and stuff of that nature. In 2004 at the Ford Nationals, we debuted the car and unveiled it. And Ev Rouse and John McIntyre saw the car again for the first time in 30 some odd years. And that weekend at Beaver Springs Dragway on Saturday night, we took the car out there, and I basically handed the keys to Ev and let him take the first pass down the drag strip. From that point on, we did a little bit of exhibition racing here and there, and in 2008 2009 at the Ford Nationals. We were down there again with the car, and Ev Rouse was down there visiting. And if you recall, I told you about the fact of in '66 he would shift this thing somewhere either before or right after the engine blew up. So down there I thought I'd be a nice guy again and say, hey Ev, take the car for a run down the strip. I took a couple passes myself. So he took a pass, and wouldn't you know, this time he shifted it after he blew up the engine. So in 2009 the engine blew up, and what we did is we rebuilt the same exact engine. We had to acquire a new block for it. Still the same camera head, still all the same camera parts that were original to this car, but the block we did at that time, and we built it with really high performance internals at that time. Once we built the engine, we decided at that time we were going to just make this a more enjoyable car. We dropped the engine compression from 13.5 to 12.1, 456 gears, and put 411s in there, and decided we'd cap off shifting at about 6,000 RPM rather than the 7,500. We made 3 passes with the car. The third pass was in the low 10-second area, and since that time we retired the car, and it's been part of the exhibition at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum for the past 3 years. This is the 427 sock camera motor that Ford made back in the 64, 65 area. They attempted to qualify for NASCAR, and because it was 600 horsepower versus maybe 425 of the Chrysler Hemi, it was a pretty formidable force, and it was just too much for NASCAR. They banned it from racing. So Ford found homes for this in drag racing and boat racing, and Ford's race shop, contract race shop, Holman Moody, who had prepped the 65, 66, 67 Le Mans 427 cars, ended up with a whole bunch, or the majority of the 427 sock motors. So this motor was acquired by Rankin Ford from Holman Moody. Ev talks about driving down to Detroit to pick it up at the Ford factory in Detroit. And once they got this motor, they went through it like every other good racer does, and balanced, blueprinted, and all of those things to the motor. The motor has 3 runs on it right now. It has in it now a scat billet crank, Carrillo rods, Venolia pistons, crane cams in it. It's running an MSD ignition, and the reason we're running the MSD is so that we can set a rev limit on the rev limit box. And other than that, it's pretty much as it was. I point these items out right here. These bonnets on top of the Holley carburetors. John McIntyre, the original crew chief, these were missing. They weren't with the car when I bought it. But John McIntyre made these, and he made these how he made the original one. So it's really nice that we had him involved at that point in the restoration of this car. We did put an electric fan on for cooling. It has enough cooling to make a quarter-mile pass, but it's not the kind of thing that you could drive this around on a daily basis by any means. Behind the engine, it's running a C6 automatic transmission. The C6 automatic transmission has a modified valve body. At the time that they put this motor in, John McIntyre had just gone to work in late 1966 for Ford in the performance group in the transmission area, and he built a very specific transmission with a very unique one-off Ford valve body that's a reverse shift pattern and has some other valve characteristics to it. I'm not aware of that. So it's running this motor plus the C6 automatic transmission. This is the Wild Child.